Hello, viewers. This is Dr. Qamar Cheema at the Snowbird Institute, and today we are going to have a conversation on American foreign policy in the Donald Trump presidency. For this, I have an excellent panel. I have with me the former Foreign Secretary and the Chairman Snowbird Institute, Ambassador Azaz Ahmed Chaudhry, and I have with me Dr. Qamar Al-Huda, who is a Michael E. Paul Distinguished Visiting Professor of International Affairs. There is a lot of things which I can say further. He has served as Associate Adjunct Professor at the Georgetown University School of Government. Dr. Huda co-founded and was the Vice President of the Center for Global Policy, a nonpartisan think tank that focuses on UN security and foreign policy in Middle East, South Asia, and East Asia. And Dr. Huda was also a senior policy advisor for the U.S. Department of State Secretary Office for Religion and Global Affairs. I can read a lot about Dr. Huda's introduction, but I think this is just enough to intimidate our viewers that we have a very special guest with us. Thank you very much, Dr. Huda, for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. So, Ambassador Azaz, I will start with you with the opening remarks, and then I will go to Dr. Qamar Al-Huda. So, on American foreign policy in the Donald Trump presidency, today is a great day for Pakistan. In one of the speeches, in one of the first speech he did at the U.S. Congress, he praised Pakistani government and thanked the Pakistani government. So we were very confused and worried that how Pakistan-U.S. relations will be in that. But I just want to give an opening remarks. How do you see President Donald Trump's presidency for the international system, for the transatlantic alliance? And particularly this changing calculus in international politics, and also how do you see this relationship bilaterally as well? So if you can give opening remarks on that, and then I'll go to Dr. Qamar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Qamar, and let me also join you in welcoming Qamar Al-Huda Sahib. He, as you have rightly introduced, is a very, very knowledgeable person on these issues, and sitting in the US itself and having worked with the government, I'm sure his views will be very, very valuable for our audience. I would say in my opening remarks that Trump has entered the scene at a time when the world is already passing through a turmoil kind of situation, a disarray in the world order that was created some 80 years ago. And in fact, there is no, interstate conduct rules in play at this moment. And sort of might is right is the order of the day. And that's what is happening. And it all started perhaps with the US itself when it invaded Iraq in 2003 without any authorization from the United Nations. And then, every other country started following the same approach that America wanted to follow, which is America first. So everybody said, all right, we'll also follow the same. And now here we are, where Donald Trump wants to maximize in his own judgment the interests of the US. And he thinks that he will make America great again. We're not really sure, because with friends and with sort of not so friends, he has acted in a manner which is quite extraordinary, which is quite out of the normal. And we can see that the whole world is now is a bit confused as to where would things land, because he every day comes up with his view, his worldview, which is really not the norm. And so from Canada and Mexico to Russia and China and the middle powers and every other country is watching eagerly as to what would happen next. We know that all the norms that we had seen developed during the past 80 years are now in disarray. There is no free international trade. Protectionist walls are going up. Immigrants are now being viewed as security threats or economic threats, and the world is whole lot different. So Donald Trump comes at a time to, in a way, he signifies that chaos on the global scene. How would it pan out? What kind of new balance of power will emerge? We are yet to see. But we see that Donald Trump likes to play with the big boys. He likes to deal with President Putin, with President Xi, and let's see how many changes he makes further. But one thing is good, that he wants to end wars. He wants to end the war in Ukraine, but in a manner that has disappointed Europe, that has disappointed Ukraine. He wants to end the war in Gaza, in Israel, in Middle East, but in a manner that totally eclipses any resistance to Israel. So a very, very prejudiced and biased worldview he's coming up with. Bilaterally, I think Pakistan is facing a benign neglect from the US, which is good. And the only word that we heard from him was, as you mentioned, a word in the US Congress, word of appreciation for what Pakistan has done. That could also open doors for further cooperation between Pakistan and the US. But we'll keep fingers crossed, because for many in the US, Pakistan is already in China camp, and China is their main rival, so to say. So I think final word is not yet out. We will see how it takes shape. But Pakistan, our Pakistani leaders and the people of Pakistan actually want to have good relations with the US, while their main anchor of relationship is with China. How would we balance out these two relationships? Time will tell. But many in this country, including myself, want to see a more, a situation where we maintain relations with both countries. But I'll pause here, and I like to, naturally we are here to listen to Mr. Qamar Huda, whose views we are eagerly waiting. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Azaz. Moving to you, Dr. Qamar Huda. What we have seen, how the America is looking. We have seen the tariff wars, the tariffs which the Americans implemented, and then there were retaliatory tariffs from Canada, and again retaliatory tariffs from United States, and then we listen from the EU, European Union. I was listening to the EU Commission President. She was talking about era of rearmament for the Europe, and they are building some $800 billion for their defense. And then we are seeing that there is a global realignment. So how do you see, while sitting in the United States, that how the American strategic community is looking these developments, and how the society is looking, Dr. Qamar?
Thank you. Most appreciate those kind words of introduction. What we're seeing in the foreign policy analytical world and in the strategic studies world is something that is unique in its history, which is, if we just took a macro look of the past 80 years since post-World War II, just a macro, it has been a world divided between the U.S. And world power, and then, of course, then the Soviet Union. And then most of the states had to assign or partner up within these two powers, right? And then, of course, there's the non-aligned movement. But in the past 80 years, the world has been organized, and sort of the power has been distributed through these two great thinking. And then within this time was the establishment of the liberal order, the order of partnerships, the order of international organizations, and the world of multilateralism, right? The rule of law, etc. And in it, these institutions were used to organize the powers of those two great powers, the Soviet Union or the U.S. Now, after the Cold War, I'm just taking a big picture, because this is what was being discussed here in the security studies world. That this post-Cold War of multipolar, then you had, of course, the U.S., Russia, and China, and the rising influence of India and other states too, with BRICS. So what we're seeing is a real, not just a challenge to global order, is a challenge to the liberal order. the challenge of partnerships, the challenge of the way things have been done, which actually cost these powers a great deal of their own resources. And so President Trump it belongs to not only a particular wing within the Republican Party that sees that this liberal order has cost and expended too many resources as being a leader in its global affairs. And now it's time to reorganize the world where you still can maintain leadership, still can move away from this binary thinking that Russia is the global threat to all Western interests. And China is also a threat to a point where we need to expend all of our resources to diminish its rise or its influence. So what is happening is a seismic change for the U.S. foreign policy because it's telling its partners, its Western allies, as we saw what happened in Munich Security Conference and before that at Davos, we had American senior leaders, vice presidents, and an NSC advisor, Mr. Waltz, all speaking about how Europe has to refocus. Its enemy is not Russia. Its enemy is not Russia. Its enemy is its own self, in its problems in freedom of speech and not enhancing its own institutions. Sort of like a very tap on the wrist and saying you need to realign your own priorities. And the U.S. is not going to pay for Europe's security. You will have to do your own security. And as we've seen, as a first example of this is what happened last week with President Zelensky coming to the White House. Big drama. He was berated. And then within 48 hours, within 48 hours, we have the Europeans stepping up close to $6 to $7 billion in military aid. U.S. stopped military aid to Ukraine. And this is just an example of this shift. I mean, there's many, many things that I think are to come. And then yesterday, the President Trump announced in his speech that he received already a letter of agreement for the mineral agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine, and also for upcoming ceasefire. So what we see is a very interesting, many levels of a negotiation, many different perspectives in conflict resolution, at the same time of the shift of U.S. leadership in the global order. And the global order needs to, the partners need to take care of their own security concerns, need to put in more funds for their own security, and also at the same time, when there's a trade imbalance, they also need to make sure the U.S. is not, according to this current administration, is not being exploited in terms of a trade balance. And so they were tariffing its own closest allies, our two countries bordering the U.S., Mexico and Canada, but also China and 25 other close allies. So what we've seen is what I would call a seismic change in the foreign policy and domestic policy. And this is really important. And how it relates to South Asia and to Pakistan, we can discuss that. But I do think that the European partners are just awakening. And after Macron's visit, Prime Minister's visits from UK and of course Canadians, after all these visits, they're just realizing, although most of this was already promoted and during the campaign, much of it is written in what we call 2025 strategy on how to do foreign policy and domestic policy, how to realign priorities. All this was laid out in the past year. But I think many of these partners are just realizing it now, the March 5th, just realizing the 6th of what is the reality of this new partnership with the United States.
So, do you think, you have just given an overview of the entire situation. Dr. Qamar, do you see that this transatlantic alliance is falling somewhere? And what kind of a world the Americans will see if this transatlantic alliance collapse? For instance, we just heard that the Americans have stopped giving aid, and just right now when we are speaking, we heard that the Americans have stopped sharing intelligence with the Ukrainians. So do you think if the transatlantic alliance falls, do you think that the America will no more be the superpower?
Yeah. What is happening, I think, the transatlantic partnership with the U.S., we're seeing a realignment of priorities and values, where the U.S. is dictating and determining what these things are. It's not going to be traditional, where the U.S. will constantly pay and constantly pay the many things that it leads, whether it be in NATO, whether it leads in other security partnerships or any other economic concept. So the most important thing, I think we haven't said, or it's not very clear in the global political analysis, is that this Trump administration has said repeatedly that when the European alignment came together, EU specifically, they saw that as a direct threat to the American economics and American banking industry, and also trade. So they actually see the EU as a threat, and they want to recalculate how to work with the EU, but not waiting for what the EU will do. So when you calculate your closest partners, and especially the way they organize themselves as the EU, and as everyone knows by now, that EU was a project coming out of World War II, but it took at least 3 decades to come together, 4 decades or more. But the point of it is that there's been backlashes with Brexit, and other right-wing movements within Europe. And so the U.S. is capitalizing on this. The administration is capitalizing on this inner tensions in Europe, as well as the schisms within how EU can respond very slowly and is inefficient with its own bureaucracy. And because of this, and you can see this an example of the Ukraine war, how slow they were dependent on moving on this, and how they've been slow on many, many things. So this administration wants to capitalize on that while maintaining its some partnerships, but not taking the lead in terms of its expenses in this transatlantic relationship.
Well,
May I
Dr.
come in here?
Yeah, okay. Yes, sir.
When Donald Trump announced his national security policy in his first term, December 2017, he said that major power strategic competition with China and Russia would be the topmost national security policy. Europe was nowhere on the scene. It was presumed that transatlantic alliance will continue. But this time around, he has actually started with Europe. You hear very little about China except for the tariffs. Other than that, we don't see much rhetoric about South China Sea or Taiwan Strait or things of this sort. He's focused on Europe, and the Europeans get it. Now, Europeans, there are two sides to it, which I want to then pose you a question. One is, in my view, Ukraine war will not continue anymore. Europeans cannot afford to sustain this war on behalf of Ukraine. I don't think they can afford it because bulk was being borne by the US. And secondly, Europe will now have to cough out much more for their own security, which will take a long time. I mean, it won't happen. So some in Europe are thinking that perhaps they should just wait out these 3 years of Trump era, because he is not representing the mainstream. His supporters were annoyed with globalization, with internationalism, because they thought that it was taking away, this process was taking away their jobs. So it's a temporary phenomena which will go away. So many in Europe would probably wait it out, but at the same time keep spending, increasing their spending on their militaries. So my question would be, is based on these observations, that do you think that transatlantic alliance is dead and now, or do you think that it's only a few strains will probably go away with time?
It's an excellent question, Ambassador Saab. I would just say that for those who believe that this transatlantic is just a little blimp, it's a 4-year administration and they'll wait it out, I think that's a miscalculation, because what we see is a new rise of this type of thinking within the political party, not only the Republican Party, but of course, look at the rise of his vice president, Mr. J.D. Vance. who's gone to Europe, who's expressed these sentiments, and is going to express this new policy. And we have to remember that even if Donald Trump only lasts 4 years, JD Vance can come for 8 years, right? If he is elected as president. So this will be a period of 12 years with Donald Trump and JD Vance's 2 terms. So this is a possibility. It's a strong scenario, and it all depends on many, many domestic factors, of course. The elections in the U.S. are not determined by foreign policy. It's usually determined by domestic economic issues and security issues, domestic issues. But foreign policy and the removal and moving back from globalization, there is a group very supportive of this within, of course, Republican Party, but outside the mainstream U.S. society, that it's been costing the U.S. a great deal amount. It's taking so much investment, time, energy. It's also a lack of focus on U.S. infrastructure and U.S. needs and priorities. So this is not just a random thought. These are underlying values we're seeing and expressed on daily newspapers and on the news. The U.S. I don't have the percentage, but this has been growing since I would say since the first war of Afghanistan and Iraq. Was an overcommitment to global issues, an overcommitment to overseas concerns, and driving domestic at the expense of domestic issues. But on the issue of transatlantic, I think there's some that will wait it out, but I think those who are doing it at the expense of what all these sort of repercussions that will happen in this time. This is the man and team that's very much committed to transactional politics, is also tied to something called integrative bargaining. The pie is, this is the winners and this is the losers in this bargaining deal. And they do not want to lose in any bargaining, any negotiations. And also, there's a new realignment that Russia could be a partner in Middle East security and energy and other sorts of sectors, tech, instead of being a competitor and as they use the word, demonized. And they're not an enemy. This is the terms that the Republicans are saying. This shift with this new Russian-American alliance is really important to acknowledge, and I think the Europeans should see this pretty fast.
Well, Professor Huda, the American strength has been its alliance, and the alliance particularly with the democratic world. American strength has not been alliance with the autocratic leader like Putin. But how do you see, what if the European Union decides to fund the Ukraine war? Because at the end of the day, they believe that they have Putin, they have Russia on the border, and the immediate threat is to Europe, not to the United States. And they all call this big Atlantic Ocean is which Zelensky told him, you have a big ocean between you and Europe. So what if the European Union funds the Ukraine war? One thing. Secondly, do you think that America can remain superpower or great power without these alliances?
Well, it's a fantastic question, Dr. Cheema. The Europeans can fund the war and give support to President Zelensky to a certain extent, but it's been very clear and concise for almost 15 months. It's a stalemate. So why are you funding a war when there's a stalemate? When there's not enough soldiers, there's too many casualties. The territory exchanges have been basically a stalemate. So what are you funding and advancing the war? And especially if you have one party willing and finally coming to the table to negotiate, which is Mr. Putin. And so you have Mr. Putin coming to the table and negotiate. Zelensky is interested in negotiating. There may be lots of concessions, and maybe the Europeans may or may not have to live and tolerate with it. However, if they continue funding the war, it would be a contradiction to, well, there's a peace deal, there's a peace agreement already existing. So then the table is turned to why are you continuing this war when we can actually end it today? This is the argument that I think the administration would put forth. And so that puts the EU partners in the corner. Why are we putting when we have a deal? So what's going to happen, I think, is they may fund the war until the Europeans can come up with their own peace deal, and they can be strong advocates for Zelensky peace negotiations, which he will hopefully received as much as possible. And I think this is because what now I think is we have President Trump on a very fast track to resolve this, and I guess there will be a lot of concessions, and so the Europeans can at least help Zelensky with at least retaining some national sovereignty, some territorial sovereignty. But I think on the other side, which you just asked, which is can America still be a great global leader if it changes its priorities? I think the trajectory of the American power in the global scene is still very obvious and clear, concise. It may not be on past issues like on democracy promotion, on human rights. It may be on many other things, which is what is best for America's interest, when America's first policy, right? So what is America's interest? And most of this will be on that. I think this is causing a realignment and re-shifting of many partnerships, and the American leadership will not disappear. It just will be emphasized in specific areas.
So, Dr. Qamar, on this question of tariff wars, we have seen that the American people they will feel the pain. This is what Canadian Prime Minister told. Do you think that there is a panic and uncertainty in the American society because of these tariff wars?
Oh, it's been a major discussion in the public square on how tariffs play out to the consumer. And there's one camp that says Americans will definitely pay in the beginning, and there will be lots of cost to the consumer. And there's other schools of thought. Economists will say, no, actually, the cost will not be coming to the consumer. It will be picked up by the market or be picked up by the companies, who will then find other ways through tax credits to then use those tax credits. So there's been multiple angles on how these tariffs will play out in the American economy. But I think the typical American is going to and has expressed the concerns, his fears that food prices will go up, clothing will go up, gas and so forth, cost for steel and everything. Anything with tech will also go up. But this is a concern, but the question is we don't know the impact. We don't know when this will happen. And that's uncertainty is causing a great deal of sort of stress. And even though President Trump has said there will be some economic problems in the beginning, he said the long-term impact will be better. So there's some reassurances according to his administration.
So, Professor Qamar, on this question, on if you come on Pakistan and India and South Asia, how do you see this American approach towards this region? Do you think that the Americans will keep looking the region from the Indian and Chinese lens? What do you make of that? You have seen the Prime Minister Modi's visit to India. How do you see his visit to the United States, and particularly America is going to sanction, put tariffs on Indians as well. So how do you see that?
Yeah, I think the fact that he's putting tariffs on a number of partners and allies is just across the board. So there's no real favoritism, or it's just these are the markets that we trade in. And based on those trades, we want to make sure there's a trade balance and that it is equitable. So I think, and he made sure Prime Minister Modi understood that. But I think he has a very long relationship with Prime Minister Modi, and I think they have a very close relationship. And as we can see, he was one of the top 5 international visitors to the White House. So this again reaffirms their commitment to the U.S.-Indian alliance, particularly for the Indo Pacific Strategy, IPS. So this reassures also more military support, more military trade, military as well as other sectors, tech, aviation, et cetera, et cetera. So they're going to continue all this, but with the understanding that there will be tariffs. And also, I don't think, as the ambassador said, the hype of the China as an enemy is going to be used in the rhetoric as much. It's understood whether the competition of in the Indo-Pacific Ocean. It's understood what the Americans are doing to respond to Chinese vessels in the ocean. And it's understood how the alliance between India and U.S. is to maneuver and to contain that. It's all understood. I think for South Asia, the quest for foreign policy is trying to get all the other South Asian countries, right, to be a part of IPS. And I think this is what the Trump administration wants. And it wants a greater collaboration and cooperation, and to stop 20th century tensions and historic enmity to be put to rest. And I think this is what the administration is going to do between India and Pakistan, and to revive India-Bangladesh relationships, revive Sri Lanka onto the map. And I think they're trying to, instead of just heavily relying on the massive size of India, but to use all of South Asia, if not Central Asia.
So, Professor, how do you see that after there is a ceasefire in Middle East? What do you think that what if this war ends in Europe? What would be the main priority of United States government? Either it is going to be the Indo-Pacific, either it is going to be the Latin America, either it is going to be countering China. What do you think the topmost agenda of Donald Trump after he's done, or he will look more inward the way he has outsourced everything to Elon Musk?
He has, as we say, many balls in the air. He's juggling everything, and he's and this time, in these 4 years, there is a sense of such strong confidence that they can do everything domestically, internationally, that this is, and because you're on a timeline, it's not just the 4 years, it's actually 18 months, because they're afraid of the midterm elections can go wrong and you can lose seats in both the House or the Senate. So it's really the short term of how to be successful in the very short term of 18 months in domestic and foreign policy, and mostly importantly domestically and the economy. But in terms of international policy, I think there is going to be continued emphasis on the Middle East, particularly on reviving the Abrahamic Accords, right? And also this new Middle East security pact that they want to continue with the Russians involved. They want to probably most limit Chinese influence in the Middle East and in Africa. As you know, they have a big footprint in there. With the support with the Indians alliance, they're going to support this Middle East security. But in order to get to the Middle East security with Russian support, Indian support, they really need, and they've said this very clearly, they need to have this, what they call the Hamas and Gaza irritant to be completely gone. And so they're hoping for the neighbors and for international order to make sure that their presence is no longer there. And as you can see, it's such a bold and statement, right? If you live in the Middle East, to say that not Hamas, but anyone involved with the Quran or Muslim Brotherhood, or that type of is political Islam, as they say, to have this irritant gone is, and they need to take the lead. Their own Arabs need to take the lead on this, or the Americans will do it this way. So it's again either or into sort of negotiation, which also is a way to light the fire under the Saudis. That if you want to be the superpower in the Middle East, and then you need to act and be the superpower and do something about resolving this conflict with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So that would be definitely an issue, an area of concentration. Of course, there's the concentration in Panama, and of course in Latin America on the influence of Chinese in Chinese ports, and of course the remnants of the 20th century communist movements.
So in the end, Professor, how do you see the Pakistan-US relations? Just today, you have seen that Pakistani media is highlighting Donald Trump's one sentence: "Thank you, Pakistani government, for supporting us, for bringing arresting that one terrorist who killed 13 American soldiers in Afghanistan." So, how do you see the Pakistan-US relations in the Donald Trump's presidency?
One of the ways to understand sort of politics and policies is to understand personalities, the psychology of personalities, and the group thinking and the ideology of that group thinking. And I think this is, if you do those 4 or 5 areas of this particular individual, saying thank you to a country like Pakistan, it is a very important olive branch because, as we know, the Biden administration left with sanctions, has given the cold shoulder to Pakistan in many ways. And this is the way of saying that's not who we are. We respect relationships, we respect historic ties, and we respect the work and the alliance that we have. So that's the text, the context that he said thank you for what Pakistan did in counterterrorism. I think Pakistanis should appreciate that. It's a door that is opened. But I think, if I may be so audacious to say, Pakistan needs to think of the multiple avenues to build upon this, not just counterterrorism, but build upon trade, build upon strategic dialogues, build upon strategic geographic importance, geopolitical importance, build upon people-to-people contact, everything outside of military counterterrorism. I think this is the way that Pakistan has hung most of its eggs in that one basket. But I think it could do so much better if it opens the door to many other aspects of the relationship.
Anyhow, let's conclude the discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. Qamar Khuda. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for sparing the time for the Snowbird Institute.
Thank you for having me.